right, welcome to TruthScript Tuesday. I'm your host, David Harris. We're not going to do an article review this week. We'll review some of those articles next week. We're actually going to do sort of a special episode today to tackle a topic that is becoming extremely important on both sides of the pond. So in Europe and in the United States, this is becoming probably the central issue. And Christians need to have biblical perspective on it. So joining me today to discuss this, because he recently wrote a really great article on the subject, is Jamie Bambrick.
Lovely. Nailed it.
Thanks for joining us, Jamie. So we're gonna talk about immigration or migration. This is sort of just popping into my head. I mentioned that we're sort of going to have a discussion about this, but the goal is to give Christians a really clear picture of how should they think about this topic biblically in a macro and a micro sense. So on the macro level, if you're going out to vote, which candidate should you support? What policy should you support based on biblical principles? But then on a micro level, how should you treat and deal with people who are coming from other lands very quickly, very rapidly, changing the place that you live, practically overnight in some cases? Really, how should you look at these people biblically? How should you think about the situation? How can you show Christ's love in this situation, but also, simultaneously stand for biblical principles of law, justice, things like that. So I guess to set a context before we really go any farther, Jamie and I both have fairly unique perspectives on this issue. So we'll just sort of take turns kind of giving our perspectives and talking about the current context in either place where we live. So Jamie, why don't you go first? And if you want to sort of recap, some points of your article, but what is going on in the UK with migration, immigration, what do you call it? What is this phenomenon? How long has it been going on? Americans aren't going to be as familiar with this necessarily, though the situations are almost exactly the same now. Can you just give us kind of a bullet point overview of, not necessarily bullet point, but an overview of the situation in the UK?
Yeah, great. Yeah. So in the UK, we've had mass immigration really since the mid-1990s. So the Blair government functionally opened up the borders, and we had a very small level of net immigration until that point. And it has been a key political issue in a number of different areas. So it was not the primary reason for Brexit, but it was the secondary reason. It was number 2 on the list. The primary reason for Brexit was national sovereignty. But the second reason was mass immigration and wanting to get control of our borders. In spite of that fact, the Conservative government, ostensibly Conservative government in the UK, has only made things drastically worse in that regard. And they're going to get voted out this coming towards the end of the year. They're going to have another election. We don't have them in November like you guys do, but it'll be towards the end of this year, whatever date they pick. And they're going to lose that election by an absolute landslide, really, over this issue. We've got to the point now, so I'm in Northern Ireland, so we are part of the UK, but we're also very closely connected, obviously, to the Republic of Ireland, where it is also a massive issue. In the UK, we're at the point now where 1 in 6 people in the country are not born in the country. You have the particularly and probably the most concerning element of it is a sort of radical Islamic element that has really shown itself over the recent conflict in Israel. So whatever your perspectives on that are, very concerning for us locally is that there are hundreds of thousands of jihadists or pro-jihadist people living in the UK. You have migrant rape gangs that have been assaulting, tens of thousands of young British girls. There's been, and the police don't look into it because of, they'll get called racist for doing so. They'll arrest anybody who talks about it. So you have all of that going on. And then in the Republic of Ireland, they've also had the same issue. It started probably slightly later, but it's also been the same thing. For instance, last year, there was over. So 1 in 36 people in the Republic of Ireland have moved there in the last year. So the equivalent in America, I worked this out before coming on, would be 10 million people coming into the country in a single year. Which, so because it's a small population, right? So percentage wise, that's what that would be. So this is causing a lot of problems. There are probably a few big ones. Number one would be the cost of housing. The primary driver of poverty in the UK is the cost of housing. I work for, we do a food bank as part of our church. And the number one cause of poverty, we see it over and over again, is that people can't afford rent. So they pay all their money out just to have somewhere to live. I have friends to the south of the border. They have good professional jobs, and they are sleeping on people's sofas because, they can't find somewhere to live. There was a case recently where I had other friends that were looking for somewhere, and there was, in the entire county, there was one house available for rent in the whole county. So that is a huge issue, and that's being driven by this massive influx of demand for housing. You bring in 600,000 people net per year, as we're doing in the UK, 100,000 plus net per year in the Republic of Ireland. That's a huge problem. Crime is also another one. So we've found. So I don't know. I've heard in America that even illegal immigrants, maybe you can correct me on this later, but they perhaps commit crimes at a lower rate than the general population. It's very much not the case in Europe or in the UK. I think you're gonna correct me. That's fine.
There's no way to know because the way that the statistics are counted, there's really just no way that you can know that.
Sure. Yeah. So that's that, and I expected that would probably, that sounds like a finessed statistic there, damn lies and statistics. But it very much so when you break it down in the UK or in Europe, so Denmark did a big study on this. They found that, well, you get immigrants from Western countries, they're very law abiding, broadly speaking. Obviously you have the odd bad egg, but people that are coming from other countries that are Western, that are advanced nations, they're pleasant and they contribute financially and they don't commit crimes. But you get ones from Middle East and Africa, they commit crimes at extraordinary rates. So I think in my article, I'm trying to remember what the exact stat was. 70% of violent crimes in Paris were carried out by non-French participants or perpetrators last year. So that's enormous, right? So that's the third one. That's the second one. And then the third one is just the breakdown of culture. Whenever you bring in people that do have a radically different culture, and probably the main way in which you see this, as I said, was radical Islam. But when you bring in people that follow a completely different religious ideology, that hold to Sharia law, that are more likely to join ISIS than the British Army, which is true of British Muslims, that is a massive cultural shift. That is not a positive one for the people that live here. British culture has, like any culture, positives and negatives. But the destruction of the positive sides of culture here is not a good thing, and that's very much happening. So that's kind of a broad, sort of quick stab at here's where we're at. I mean, what about yourselves? So you're.
So our situation, we've similarly had a steady rate of. I'm just going to use the word illegal. It can be triggering, I guess, but we've had a steady rate of illegal immigration because here it is just people walking over the border, finding a hole in the fence, sort of. More often than not, there's a very, very big business that we have on our southern border in getting people across. We call them coyotes, the guys who run that whole show. They usually work for the drug cartels. Not a lot of people know this. It also goes on the Canadian border, in remote parts of Maine and other areas up there, but usually with drug running. But the southern border is where the main show's at. So anyways, really since the 1980s, we've had sort of a steady influx, mostly economic migrants, people who are looking for work, usually picking vegetables in Arizona. That's like the sort of the stereotypical thing, doing construction in Los Angeles. really what we've experienced over the last 3 years, it's been 3 years now, is completely unprecedented. There's never been anything like it in our history. So that number jumped out at me because you said it would be the equivalent of 10 million in 1 year. So since the inauguration of our current president 3 years ago, we have had between 5 and 10 million people come in that we know about. So those are our border patrol has gone from patrolling the border to a concierge service. So they now functionally, they pick up people and they bring them to a processing center, and then the system has gotten to such an incredibly insane, like, it's just like a denial of reality on a daily basis. But basically the way it works now is you walk over, you take your passport or your ID, you actually throw it away at the border or burn it or something. Then you're processed. You go directly to the Border Patrol. You find them. In fact, when they walk over, they call 911. They're picked up by the Border Patrol. So the whole thing is flipped. You're taken to a processing center, and then you kind of just say where you want to go. If you don't know where you want to go, then they'll send you, like if you're in Texas, they'll usually send you to Chicago or New York City. So what we're experiencing right now is these people they're coming over, and then they're sort of filtering out to different parts of the country, because obviously the United States is a massive country. It's huge. But these individual cities already have, significant issues with poverty and people who just kind of live on the poverty line permanently. There's housing issues. New York City, I moved out of New York partially because I couldn't afford housing. So with my job, I moved to a place where I could afford housing. And even where I am now, it's becoming an issue. So in places like New York City, there's not really houses, similar impact. Chicago has received a lot of the people who are coming in, to the point that it's actually starting open hostility between the local population, which is mostly Black, and where the migrants are ending up, and the migrants. So there's now you can see videos, like if you go on Twitter, YouTube, and you do the right searches, you can see people fighting, shouting at each other. It's becoming hostile. Partially because, like, they're going into Chicago, but they're going in at during the winter, and Chicago winters are absolutely brutal. So some people have already died. There's people living in tents. You can't really survive. So right now it's just a big giant mess. It wasn't good before. Like, Donald Trump kind of ran on that. That was his big issue, is we're gonna put up a wall and we're gonna close the border, which for most people just seemed like an obvious thing for most people that supported Trump. But then, like, when he was ousted in 3 years ago, then it's like we flicked a switch, and now it's okay. No, this is good. We're gonna bring in all these people, and so they can't work. That's another thing. These people legally cannot work because they have not had their court dates. Their court dates are now in 2027. So they have to. Right now, they're expected to live basically on public assistance until 2027, which is actually going to destroy every single city that they live in, because there will be no money. So they'll have to cut police. They'll have to cut fire departments. They're already doing that in New York City. They'll cut education. They'll cut all these other things. And so the local populations feel, I think justly so, that these new folks are getting absolutely prioritized over them. So that's the situation. For me personally, I'm an ESL teacher, so I teach English to these people when they come in. Mostly Spanish. I speak Spanish. I love Spanish culture. My wife is Dominican. I married into that culture. I'm very at home. But the population that's coming in now is very different than the population we had before. Before, we had typically Mexico, and now we're getting more like Honduras, more remote regions of Guatemala, which means that the students that come in are also very different. So your average ESL student would be generally literate. They would speak their first language. They would understand basic mathematics. They just needed to learn English. As long as they learn English, they could kind of function okay. The new sort of crop of students that I'm getting, and this is in Tennessee. This is in a remote county in Tennessee that we're getting from these kids.
Yeah.
a lot of them are actually functionally illiterate. They can't read or write at all. They are unable to do math. They'll be in middle school, high school, and they really have not had any education. So the strain on the education system, like that's a very, like, I'm a very sort of remote block in this whole, this whole structure. But it causes a lot of strain even on my, like, a remote county in Tennessee, even on my job. Yeah. So,
one thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, one thing I forgot to mention, or I was given an overview of the UK, but so as I said in my article, my wife is Bulgarian, and so I'm similar in terms of, married to someone that's not from here, and very happily married. And again, similar, love Bulgarian culture, love going out there, get stuck into all of that, and we enjoy that. My Bulgarian is terrible. I cannot say that I speak Bulgarian, but I make a very poor attempt from time to time. And similarly, it's interesting, I would say, that pre-Brexit, so it's interesting just that timing. If you said, you used to have migration from, kind of your neighbors, like Mexico, we would have been similar. So we would have had, say, Eastern European migrants would have been quite common in the UK, for the last 30 or so years. And broadly speaking, everyone really liked them. Like, they got on well. They were culturally compatible. Obviously you have slight, they bring some Polish food or whatever, that kind of thing goes on. But that's fine. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Hardworking, assimilated well with society. Again, once you learn the language, they were good. Now the migrants that we're getting are, violent gangs largely, and, radical Muslims and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a very different quality of person that's coming over, and it's in the name. I don't know if, are you guys using this term? Has this been called? So here it's called a refugee crisis. Anybody that shows up, they're automatically a refugee, even if they're not fleeing any war. They're coming from France. There's no war there, but that's where they're coming over from. Yeah.
We've started using the term because we've gone through a whole, the politically correct terms have gone through their evolution. So your average Trump voter, they're still going illegal, like that.
Illegals.
They've held on to that. I mean, I have a term that I'm preferential to. I like the term foreign nationals because it's basically what they are. They don't have citizenship. They're here. So it's the most specific term. Nobody will use that term, so I don't use it. But I heard somebody use it. I'm like, oh, that's a really good way of describing. It was like when I was in college, like a decade ago, it was undocumented. So if you said illegal, you would immediately get in trouble. The undocumented. It's like, okay, all right. I mean, it means the same thing, but whatever. Now it's moved to migrants. So it's just migrants because immigrants is, I don't know, we say migrants. And now lately, I would say really over the last few months, we've seen a big push and change in terminology to now it's ASs, asylum seekers. So they're actually just referred to as asylum seekers. Here's a group of, they're the group that just got off a bus in Chicago, this group of asylum seekers. So that's the...
It's the same thing as refugee. It's moving the language to it's accommodating to the sort of moral superiority of victimhood that we have. So it's like, if you can call someone who's seeking asylum or a refugee, in spite of the fact that there's no evidence that that's what they're in fact doing, then that grants them status.
Yeah. So those are the contexts sort of our respective, very similar, the same thing going on. Western nations, traditionally Christian nations, with very specific cultures, right? Because like UK, very specific culture. You can ask anybody in the world, what does it mean to be British? And people will have a rudimentary knowledge of what it means to be British. American, forget about it. It's like everybody knows American because everyone consumes American culture in some way. Though I might mention that Appalachia is the superior form of American culture. Never mind. But that being said, could you recap some of the main points of the article you wrote? Just sort of were hit with this. This is a good thing from a Christian perspective. We've often been hit with. This has been the foundational issue from sort of Big Eva, from the more left of the conservative side of evangelicalism, this is a good thing because we're supposed to, right? We're supposed to offer refuge to the foreigner. We're supposed to, the world is coming to us, right? It's missional. The world is coming to us. So this is a huge blessing. Why is that not a biblical position?
Yeah. So yeah, as I see it anyway, I mean, there's probably a few things that you need to look at when it comes to this. Obviously, so I gave the analogy at the start of the article, which was, if you were asleep in your home in the middle of the night and someone comes to your door, you hear a knock on the door, you wake up and there's a family outside, a woman and children, and she's been kicked out of her home, and it's violence going on there, and you've got a big house and you take that woman in. Are you doing something righteous? Yes, of course, like 100%, you're doing something wonderful, and praise God for it. But if over time you start to get more and more and more people, and then you see that the people coming are not there because they've been kicked out, but just they like your house more, or they're actually the people that are perpetrating violence where that kind of woman has come from, where those kind of families are fleeing from. They're the people that they're fleeing from, and they are now showing up. And this is just a sort of logical argument rather than getting into specific text, but I think it's important. Is do you still have a moral obligation to welcome them in and say, yeah, you need to, you can stay here just as you have every bit as much right? Is that moral? And of course, your own family is starting to pay a cost of living in an environment that's now much more violent and much less safe and higher costs and all of these things that we've already mentioned. Like that's not biblical. I think probably the key thing in terms of this is this idea of the sort of ordo amoris, the order of loves. Biblically, you are supposed to treat different people differently. You're supposed to have a different standard for different people. So, for instance, the Bible has commands for how husbands are to love their wives. That's not an appropriate way to treat every woman in the world. Same with your church. And then that's the same is true for the political sphere. Like God's commands to the kings of Israel pertain to the nation that they were in. They didn't have the same level of obligation to every nation under the sun. They were responsible for their nation being safe and protected and godly and all of what they were called to do. And that is how it should play out in this sphere, that whenever we're looking at, well, what has God called the nation's leadership to do? Well, he's called it to look after that nation, to seek the good of that nation. So, America first or UK first or Ghana first is a totally natural, normal and good thing for the governments of the UK, US, Ghana. That is the right thing to be viewing this thing through as, right, okay, what is the lens that we're using? The lens is what is best for our people. With that, obviously, then you have this reality that migration is at its current level, with the current amount of people coming in and the kind of people coming in, it is not good for the people of those nations. Like, it's posing a serious threat in a number of different ways. There's a significant chance that major Western European nations will become Islamicized very soon. The First Minister of Scotland is a Muslim. The Mayor of London is a Muslim. Those are serious concerns. And so to say that the biblical mandate there is to encourage that, to say that that's good, that's just not accurate. Like, there's no way we can realistically say that. So also a lot of what you hear talked about in this is, well, we've got to care for the vulnerable. It's the widows and orphans. There are vulnerable people in our nations that are being persecuted by people that are being brought into these nations, right? So, as I said at the start, the migrant rape crisis. I don't know if the story probably didn't make it across the water, but what happened in Rotherham and places like that, where you had grooming gangs that were sort of, luring teenage girls, young teenage girls, 13, 14 years old, drugging them, assaulting them, passing them around. Police didn't look into it. Who's the vulnerable person there? Is it the migrant or is it the teenage girl? Right. Well, it's the teenage girl. Like that's who you're supposed to protect. There was a stabbing in London, in Dublin rather, a very high profile stabbing of a migrant Algerian migrant who had stabbed a bunch of school children and school teachers on the street in Dublin. And there was mass protests after it. That was very recent. To say that the Algerian doing the stabbing is the vulnerable person in need of protection there is just moral insanity, right?
Yeah.
Douglas Wilson, I'm sure most readers or listeners will be aware of him. I happened to be listening to, just last night, I listened to he does like a State of the Church address at the start of each year, and he gave a very useful point, not on this specific issue, but he was talking about you can have a verse, but is it the right verse and is it the one that applies? When you have gangs of criminals coming into a nation, is the verse that applies the treatment of strangers and the widows and orphans, or is it actually inappropriate? Well, it's inappropriate. So yeah, that would be my sort of quick take on, if you want to get like, biblical categories need to be properly established here. I think that's the big issue, is we've got a big category error going on where the default assumption is that the people that are here are not in any way vulnerable and the people coming in are automatically vulnerable. And very often, particularly with the kind of people we're getting in at the minute, it's pretty much the exact opposite.
Yeah. And again, you're talking in sort of biblical generalities, right? We're not getting into specific verses or passages. We could do that. You did more in your article, but I just want to tack on two little things to what you said. One thing was, you said it's not good for the nations. It's not good for the nations where the people are coming from. So I would take that a step farther. It's actually not good for the nations of origin. In other words, if you're, and just by way of example, so we are receiving in the United States a sizable chunk of the country of Honduras. So Honduras, most people in the United States don't know where it is on a map. They have no idea what Honduras is really. It's just typical. It's one of the poorest countries in Latin America. There's a lot of bad stuff that's gone on there over the last decade or so, but it's not in good shape. It's run essentially by drug cartels, and so if you're in Honduras, you would probably want to leave, but the people who do leave are the people who are able to leave, the people who have the physical stamina to make a very treacherous journey north through Guatemala and Mexico to come here. Whenever they come, they're now one more able-bodied person who is not putting into their country. So every single person who leaves. So if you kind of flip the tables there. So if these are great people that are going to benefit your nation, because that's sort of the way that it's been sold to us over the last decade or 2 decades. This is going to be, you hear this in the UK all the time, like this is going to be the next Einstein. This is going to be the next, like, this is where we're going to get, our pool of talent for the 21st century. So like, just think about that for a second. So you're going to take them. So you must really hate their nation if you want to take them away from their nation and bring them here. So, obviously that's kind of like it would be a ridiculous analogy in a way, but it is true that if you are taking good people, and you are in a sense, like, these are usually working people who could put into the places that they're coming from. They're being told it's a lot easier to come north into the United States. And you'll get free stuff, which a lot of people don't believe that's the case. That's why they use the term asylum seekers, I think. But my experience is working with these people. I've worked with these people for about 7 years on a full-time basis. There are people who do come who are fleeing specific, I guess you could say persecutions. There's regions in Mexico, the Sinaloa region of Mexico, it's on the West Coast, is in very bad shape. It's run by cartels. It's very dangerous in a lot of ways. So a lot of people do come from those regions because they're dangerous. I had a student that actually went back because they didn't like it here. So they went back to that specific region. So you're seeing, we're starting to see that too, because people are coming here and they're like, oh, this isn't this isn't the dream that I was sold. And we're kind of like, the working people are like, yeah, like, you think this is easy for us? It's not even easy for us here. So, so I guess all that to say is, the majority of people who are coming are not, they're economic migrants. They are here because they're here for Disney World. They're here because if you come to the United States, then you can get stuff. But there's an issue with, as you said, conflation of categories, where you take a verse like the widows and orphans verse, right? So James chapter, that's James 2, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
This is the basic Christian ethic: care for widows and orphans in their distress. Who is doing the caring, right? Who is he talking to? Is he talking to? And so if you just take that and throw it out into the ether, then you could make that mean anything you want to. You could use it to justify any political move, but like it's talking to you. No, you are supposed to care for widows and orphans. So how do you apply that verse, right? Go to your church and find out who the widows and orphans are. Who do you guys know about personally in your life that you know now? And if you really care about people in Honduras, then go become a missionary to Honduras. Go give up the life that you have here and go serve them there.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a couple of points.
I do think the free stuff thing is a big problem with all of this, because that's really why a lot of these people are ending up. So I lived in Sweden for a few years, and people were ending up there for the same reason that they're now ending up in the UK, which is that they have the best available benefits package. So it's just shopping for benefits. There's a lot of that going on of, what is the best, what's the most free stuff I can get. That's why they're leaving France. They're in France, perfectly safe. France is not a particularly, it's becoming a more dangerous country because of all the mass immigration. But
can you unpack that for a second? So people are coming who have been living in France to the UK. I'm not as familiar with this.
Yeah. So our migrants. So basically, in terms of illegal immigration, right? There's vast numbers of people crossing over the English Channel from France to the UK. They get on a dinghy, a small boat. I don't know if you call it a dinghy in
yeah.
yeah, you know what a dinghy is. Yeah, I just was one of those. I didn't know if that was a Northern Irish term or something.
I'm good.
Right? Yeah. So they get on one of those, and as soon as they get into British waters, the British Coast Guard does exactly what your Border Patrol does, which is acts as concierge, brings them in, and they get put up in a hotel. They get an iPhone or whatever. They get put on benefits until again they can have their court case in years. And but they're coming from France, like the country of origin. Obviously, they're originally from other places, but
right.
You meet these people. They've traveled all across Europe. They've been, they started off. They probably came through Turkey or through Greece, then moved their way through Eastern Europe. Didn't fancy that. Germany, nah, not so great. France, no, we don't like that. We'll keep going until we get to the UK, and the UK has become the sort of ultimate end destination for a lot of people because it gives them the most free stuff. That's why they don't want to stay. It's not that they're fleeing a war in France, right? This idea of a refugee is someone who's fleeing a conflict, which is again the term that we're being sold. And I don't know I'm sure there's probably slightly different takes on this. I think you can make an argument that Jesus as a baby was a refugee. I think that you could make that. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me. But what did he do? Well, obviously he was a baby, but what did Joseph do? He went to the next country, paid his own way.
The Roman Empire.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So he just hopped across the border.
Yeah.
Stayed there until it was safe, paid his own way, likely with the gifts that the Magi had given them that probably funded their stay there, probably worked as well. He was a carpenter. And then went back as soon as it was safe to do so. Yeah. Like that's a refugee. I think you can make that case that is if I don't know if everybody. I know some people don't agree with that. Maybe you don't. I don't want to say that you do.
I'm 100% with you there.
yeah. So that's fine. I totally get that. But this idea of I don't like my country and there is some violence there, so I'm just going to find the place that will give me the most free stuff and keep going. That's not a refugee. It's not the right term. I don't know how we got into this. Sorry, you asked me to unpack that a bit more. But that's So the majority are coming ultimately from. They're not French, right? But that's the country they've been in before, and they've normally been there a while, and they prefer the offer that the British government is making in terms of the amount of free stuff they get.
Yeah, yeah. So I have sort of a specific question to move into. How do we, as a Christian, right? So how do we, how should we approach this on a micro level? So we have these people who move in next to us. They're in our community. We can't stop them. Say we can't stop them politically, which actually is my first question. So I just want to deal with that, and then I want to pull up. I guess we'll do this at the end. We'll pull up sojourners, and we'll go through the verses and see if they apply or not. So we'll table that for a minute. But
Yeah.
So in Ireland, but I guess I'll give the United States context first. So in the United States, what is the political solution? Well, there's a lot of political upheaval in the United States. There has been for 3 years now. It's, most Americans there's massive migration going in within the United States, unlike anything in our entire history. So I live in East Tennessee at the foot of the Smoky Mountains. And the overwhelming majority of people that I interact with on a daily basis are from Southern California. Overwhelming majority. So they've over the last 2 to 3 years, they have come here in droves, and now they're living here. So that drives up housing prices. That creates an economic issue as well. And not that, like, there's not a lot of, I don't have like ill will towards them. I moved as well, but and they're trying to get away from a state that doesn't respect their values. So I get it, but you have that going on simultaneously. So the political solution, talking on a macro level, the political solution here would basically be to reelect Donald Trump. He's the only one who is, he's running on, we're going to have the biggest, he said it like last night at a rally, we're going to have the biggest mass deportation in history. So like there's a part of me that's like, yes, it gets you kind of, it's like, let's go. But
don't say that on the internet. No, we'll get cancelled for this if you agree with that. No.
Yeah, well, I didn't say whether I agreed. Well, I guess I could.
Right. Yeah. You said part of you was like yes, but the other part was very big, Eva, and said no, absolutely not.
There was another
everybody who's here is a dreamer. Yeah.
There's a part of me that's a dreamer. So yeah, the other part of me said this is awful. All that to say is the political solution in the United States basically would be to elect, I won't single out Trump, would be to elect one of the Republicans that is running. So it really at this point it would be either Ron DeSantis, our governor of Florida, or Donald Trump. You elect
not
one
Nikki
of them.
Haley? You're not excited about Nikki Haley?
No, I'm not excited, but it's more Republican voters are not excited. That's my issue.
Yeah.
And also she's not running on real. That's not her issue. Her big issue is Ukraine. That's sort of Ukraine and Israel and Hamas. Those are sort of, she's running on other countries' issues. She's not really running on this one. So now, to me, the likelihood of Trump getting elected again is slim to none. I don't really see that happen. I don't see how they're going to let him do. If he's going around saying we're going to do mass deportations, that seems to be the point of every government the functionality of every government like organization right now and non-government organization is to bring people across the border, like to bring them into the United States. I don't know why they would let him become president again, but all that to say, so we can go and vote. I can advocate for voting for somebody who says that they're going to do something about this. But in the UK, what is the political solution to this? What is the macro solution? Is there one? Because then that will carry us into the micro solution.
Yeah. I don't see any hope for the UK. You have the Conservative government that has, as I said, ostensibly conservative government who have conserved nothing at any point in their 14 years in power. And 15 coming up on 15, and have immigration has just gone. It's been an exponential growth curve underneath them, and only really, they had one politician, Suella Braverman, who spoke out about this in a meaningful way, and she was immediately fired. She was a member of the cabinet, so she was part of the government, and was fired for doing so. I suppose the only sort of option politically that could lead some sort of turnaround in that, and I think if he did join the Conservative Party, he would win in a landslide, would be Nigel Farage, who is kind of our Trump figure. And he would have the courage to do it, but he's not a member of the Conservative Party. He ran a UKIP, which was a sort of third party option that really campaigned on Brexit, and he was the reason why Brexit happened largely. So he has massive popularity. Also, a lot of similar to Trump. Half the country hates him, half of them really like him. But if he were to join the Conservative Party and get made the leader, which is again, chances of that happening are pretty much zero. But if that did happen, which there's some talk about, will he at some point maybe do that? Because people will never vote for a third party. It's the same as in the States. It's got to be the Republican candidate, right?
Yeah.
So he would be the only option. I think the more possibly beneficial line, and this is probably similar in the States as well, probably more possible in the States because you have the state system, is to focus a little bit more locally than nationally. And so to sort of think, right, what about city councils and what we do with, right, do we fund hotels? Do we accept a greater increase in migrants in this specific area? I think you can maybe make a bit of difference there. It's very difficult because we don't have that same level of sort of states' rights as you would have, because we don't have states. But Northern Ireland is a province, and if Northern Ireland got together and decided we were not going to play ball with this and receive X amount of people, then we could hypothetically do something there. So yeah, politically, there's not a lot of hope. Those are a couple of ways in which there could, if I was saying what are the realistic political solutions, I would look locally with a hope that maybe one day a figure like Farage, and I'll get in trouble for backing Farage, and again, like Trump, he has
not with me, but
plenty of but the I'm sure someone will write a letter, send a tweet. That would be, he would be the most viable candidate for something of a turnaround. But there's no one else out there. The Conservative Party are not going to do anything, and the Labour government are even worse. So, will be the Labour government. Sorry, Is there an attitude? So this attitude is actually kind of creeping up in the United States a little bit. Is there an attitude at all that's like, you know what, just burn it all down. Just let's let everything collapse and crumble and kind of build something from that. Yeah. Do you get that sort of? Yeah. Yeah, that's happening. Yeah, I think a lot of people are losing hope. I think a lot of people are leaving as well. I think upwardly mobile. And we're probably a wee bit more inclined to do this than Americans. So people go to Australia, go to New Zealand, go to Eastern Europe, that kind of thing. There's people looking at doing things like that. And yes, I think there is a sort of nihilistic outlook on the future of the nation that a lot of people. So Peter Hitchens is a very well-known writer here.
Yeah.
And he's a Christian. I don't really like his takes, but his takes are reflective of a viewpoint that's quite prevalent, which is it's too late, it's done, nothing we can do. Get out while you still can is kind of his take. So yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
I've followed him for a while, for probably like 10 or 12 years. He's very fatalistic. He's like,
yes, yeah.
You listen to him, you're like, man, he's so smart. I'm so depressed though now.
Yeah. I don't think it's a very Christian take, because I do think as Christians, you and regardless of eschatological opinion or anything like that, you should have faith. You should believe that God can do something that he can work these things for good. But it is hard to see a practical political solution. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that takes us into then the personal solution. So how should we approach this on a personal level, which is kind of the most, I think we've already said in dealing with a macro thing. So like, we're going to advocate for policies, and that's what we're doing right now. And that's, like with the article that you wrote and the video that you made and like TruthScript publishing it. So that's doing that. That's trying to sort of just convince people or reason with them that no, this is not biblical. This is actually not a good thing that our leaders are doing right now. This would be the biblical way. So we can do that. We can try to reason with people, and then we can vote, and there's only so much we can do. But then when the rubber meets the road, how should we think about these people who move into our neighborhoods and into our nations and our states and everything? So like for me, I'm working directly with their kids. They come in and like for me, it'll be a struggle because I'll interact with them, and I'm generally just very amiable. Like, it's hard for me not to be friendly. I'm not very good at being like mean. I'm the kind of guy who would go to a protest and like just accidentally make friends with the other side. It's not really in my nature to be as combative. Like, I can in my head, but then when I actually get out there, I'm like, hey, So I don't have really a lot of a struggle with that. I'm having more struggle lately. It's been harder to have a good attitude, I guess, with even the students that I work with. But I guess so. My question would be: so you're in full-time ministry. I'm in part-time ministry, but work with these people full-time. How should we look at these people? What does the Bible have to say about how we treat them? What our goals should be in our interactions with them?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the same as with any lost non-believer, right? Assuming they're a non-believer. I think if they're a Christian, then, hey, great, you're here. And we've been, so one slightly interesting factor, I suppose, just to throw in to that discussion is that 50% of the evangelicals in the Republic of Ireland are foreign born.
Wow, Ireland, that's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, Ireland is depending on your view of the Catholic Church, right? But if you don't consider Catholics to be Christians, I think there are faithful, believing Catholics. I have big problems with the Catholic gospel.
Right.
But if you view it as the percentage of evangelicals, if you're looking at that, it's the least reached nation in the English-speaking world.
Wow.
So it's about 1% evangelical, and half of them are foreign born. So a lot of them are coming in and actually involved in church, and they're helping reach people. I know pastors from across, the world, basically, who are in the Republic of Ireland, and praise God for that. So if you've got Christians and they're here, you're going to assume that they're here for good reasons. I think your default assumption with the people that you meet should be a positive one within reason, right? I mean, you don't, in the same way that, you don't sort of forget to lock your door or something like that. But, you want to have a default assumption that most of the people you interact with are hopefully here for good reasons until you hear otherwise. You want to start with compassion, kindness, and warmth. And, obviously then ultimately, if they're not saved, you want to reach them with the gospel. I think that is probably the solution in Britain would be a mass revival amongst the Islamic population. Like that would help us a lot, given that, as you said, there's no political will to turn this thing around. So, well, how do we see the nation saved? Politically and culturally, well, I think we see it saved spiritually. I think that is what we need to be praying and interceding, for. So I don't think it's particularly complex or different when dealing with someone from elsewhere. I think you just go, treat them the way you're trying to reach anybody that you're trying to reach. You don't have to get into that conversation. I don't think you should shout, "Go home." Something like that is actually it's unkind, and you don't know that they're here illegitimately. You don't know that, and that shouldn't be the default. I think it is important, actually. That's one thing that I notice on this issue, and I think that the Conservatives do need to do on this issue, and that doesn't mean you change the political side, but we do need to guard our hearts against bitterness or anything like that when it comes to people being from elsewhere. I think we want to reach them, bless them, love them, and as they come to faith, baptize them, get them into the church, and I think that is ultimately going to be if you had two options, if you had one option where you got a political solution to this issue without significant national repentance and salvation, or you didn't get the political solution, but you got the national repentance and salvation, the national repentance and salvation would be the better thing, because you can actually, our culture is built on Christianity. So even if these people are from elsewhere, give them the faith, disciple them, let them be discipled for a few generations. That can actually work, even if I still think that Christian nations should perhaps have different cultural emphases and so on. That's not a terrible solution. So that's what we should be doing. I don't see a sort of particular spin on that, that I think we need to put. Maybe you don't know, you work with them probably more than I do. As I said, I'm married to one. I interact to a reasonable level, but you probably have more. Do you have a lot more day-to-day interaction with people from elsewhere? So do you have stuff that you would add to that or change in that regard?
I mean, category conflation, I think. So it would be very easy to, because in a sense, the nations are coming, right? So I was a short-term missionary. Over the course of 3 years, I was in South Africa and Mozambique when I was in my late teens and early 20s. That's where I learned to drink tea properly, by the way.
Nice.
So, I have had a heart for missions. I've been to the Dominican Republic on mission trips several times. I love that whole mission side of things. I find it very exciting. I like interacting with people from other cultures. That's one of the things I really liked about living in New York, because there's so many people from so many different places, which I'll probably get, problems for that, just for saying that from some followers. But I like that. I mean, I like other cultures so much. I married into one. So, but I do love my own culture. I do love, I love my family. I love my family history. I love that too. I don't see those things as being mutually exclusive. I can love both. Now, like when it comes to categories, if I'm taking advantage of the fact that all these people are here and, I'm going to share the gospel with them. This is great. I'm going to be missional. There's no contradiction there if your categories are correct. So this whole issue coming from, especially like the mainstream evangelical side, is because it's just ripping scripture out of context, as we'll see in a minute when we look at some of these verses. What I do personally versus what I'm responsible for versus what my government is responsible for, and I'm responsible to hold my government accountable for, are two different things. They're not the same thing. Yeah. They have their job is not, the government's job is not to preach the gospel. That's my job, right? Now they can make it easier. That's their job, but I'm the one who's supposed to do that. So if they're not doing their job, and that means that people come in, then that's another person for me to preach the gospel to. And my job, I've actually had more opportunities with foreigners than any other group of people. I've had incredible opportunities where it's like, hey, tell me about Jesus. What's this all about? I worked with Chinese students when I first started. I taught social studies, and I worked with mostly Chinese students, and I had some amazing opportunities to share Christ with them. And now working with mostly Latino students, there's actually I'm seeing a shift where there's a lot of interest in evangelical theology. Like a lot of them are actually going from Catholic to evangelical. Right. There's a lot of ministries that are popping up all over the place. So I see I'm not talking on a government level. On a government level, I think you put the border up because you need to love your own people. That's your job. But on a micro level, on a local level, and again, like same in the United States, like localism is kind of where we're going. Municipalities would have to, stand up to who they're going to allow into the area or not. But as long as these people are coming in and there's these opportunities, I would say we got to take advantage of them. Like if there's an opportunity, if the Lord is sending these people and revival is a possibility, then, we should be the workers in the field. So I totally agree with you. Same situation here, but again, and I have to check my own heart all the time, because it's easy for me to conflate those categories. Yeah. Because it's like in the opposite way. So I'm not in danger of, taking the macro and moving it to the micro. Rather like ripping those scriptures out of context and becoming an advocate for open borders. That's not a danger at all. What I have to look out for is I hate what's happening to my country. I think this is awful and terrible. Don't apply it to the person sitting in front of me. Yeah. Right. Because they actually might be, they might be somebody to recruit for the kingdom. So I have to be, everybody has to be careful about conflating the categories, but I do too. That's kind of, I guess.
I agree with that. I think that's real biblical wisdom. I think that's so important. Yeah, no, I totally agree.
So I guess to sort of wrap up here, just for fun, so we're going to go back to just kind of the ridiculous nature of the way that Big Eva, the evangelical left, what's kind of become the evangelical right, has pushed these policies on the church and kind of primed Christians to accept them. So we're going to look at sojourners.
Nice. So just because we've just talked about biblical wisdom, that's the obvious next step is sojourners.
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful.
So what we'll do is why don't we switch back and forth? So I'll read a verse, and then we'll figure out, does this apply to the mass migration phenomenon or not? So I guess we'll start with the first one. Why don't you take this? Genesis 23:4. I am a stranger and alien residing among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. Yeah. So does that apply to Moroccan people coming into Northern Ireland?
I mean, in some sense, it could. Hypothetically, I think what's interesting about this is that Abraham insists upon buying it at the full price. Genesis 23. He refuses. He is not going there for the free property. He is insisting upon buying it for the price. So this is not give property to anybody who shows up for any reason free of charge. This is someone who is legitimately living in that area. Obviously, it was slightly different because Abraham was a slightly nomadic figure, but he was there with the permission of the people of the land, and he bought the land. So this was not benefits tourism on behalf of Abraham.
Okay, I'll take Deuteronomy 10:19. You shall love the stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. I mean, you could take a general. Again, there's you have to take the context into account. You could generally say, if somebody's still like, I don't know, I guess the principle here would be, don't be a jerk to somebody because they're different. This is like VeggieTales. Right. God made everybody special. Yeah. That's about as much as you could extrapolate out of that, I think, for our situation currently. I don't, you can't really take that. You can't go from that to anybody should be able to walk in across your border, and they should have, free things given to them. Okay. Leviticus 19:34. The alien who resides with you shall be a citizen among. Oh, all right. I'm not sure what translation they're using, but the alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously that there's a couple of things on that. One is that the citizen among you has to be law-abiding. Citizens should be law-abiding in your country, so that is an important element to being a citizen of somewhere. That also implies that the citizen, that they have a responsibility in terms of adopting the culture of assimilating well, and not just sort of running out and doing their own thing. And it doesn't, again, give any sense of like, okay, this is who should reside among you. I think that's the big thing. This is not saying anybody who happens to cross your border. Because, so, for instance, am I here on my own now? Are you still here? Just for
a moment.
Oh, you disappeared. You disappeared. I was like, am I? I'm not in charge of the stream. Welcome to my channel, everybody, my new channel. So interestingly, right, if that was the case, King David, when he was fighting off the Philistine, invaders, was not following this verse.
Oh, that's true.
So, yeah. Like none of the kings who defended Israel were doing this verse. So I think you need to actually categorize that correctly as to, is this someone who is living here in goodwill? Are they assimilating? Are they being like a citizen, acting in a way that follows the law? Or are they coming in and taking advantage, stealing and causing harm? And
yeah, that's a really good point.
Applicable.
Yeah, because yeah, so just open borders Israel. All right, let's see. Deuteronomy 27:19. Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow. Then all the people shall say, Amen. That's kind of in the same vein of the one up there. So I'll just move on to the next one. When they were few in number, of little account, and strangers of the land, wandering from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another, he allowed no one to oppress them. He rebuked the kings on their account, saying, do not touch my anointed ones. Okay, so I'm not even sure what the context of this passage is, but I don't think that.
Yeah, it's got to be.
First Chronicles 16. That would be.
Yeah, it's got to be Israel. Israel in the wilderness. Is that? It's got to be speaking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it's just the common thread of like, you guys were sojourners, so then treat the sojourners. Which again, like as a general principle, you could take. But
yeah. So it's kind of a useful analogy for a lot of these is going to be the poor. Right, which is, the Bible has these instructions for caring for the poor, but those are not unilateral instructions that have zero wisdom or caveats to them. So it talks about giving justice to the poor, but it also talks about not favoring the poor in court. That you should not, you should not be lenient. It also talks about if you don't work, you don't eat. So these things are generally true, but there's also wisdom around them as to how those people are coming in, right?
Yeah. You kind of see that in this one too. So Job, I was the eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I championed the cause of the stranger. I broke the fanes of the unrighteous and made them. So, it's a specific context, right? You can extrapolate a general principle from it, but it's not, not broadly applicable to 21st century foreign policy, or I guess it would be foreign policy, domestic policy.
Yeah.
All right, you want to take this one? Psalm 146:9. The Lord watches over the strangers; He upholds the orphan and the widow. By the way, the wicked He brings them to ruin. He brings ruin.
Yeah. So I don't think they like the last part of that verse. The way of the wicked He brings to ruin. I think they're going to avoid. Very, very God is concerned for those who are vulnerable. So you're not allowed to do wickedness to people because they're from elsewhere. Obviously, that includes the stranger, right? But also the way of the wicked He brings to ruin. So if you go to someone else's country and you act wickedly, He is opposed to you, right? So the standard here is righteousness, not just by default as a stranger you are righteous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, I think let's jump over to the New Testament because these are kind of just, they get a little repetitious. So Matthew 5:43-44. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say love your enemy and pray for those who persecute. I'm not really sure.
Are they admitting that some people are being persecuted by people from elsewhere? Is that what they're tacitly agreeing to in this? Yeah. And then even with this one, so I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. That's Jesus talking. So if people are hungry or thirsty, give them. It's that conflation of your personal responsibility and. Let's apply government. Yeah, apply any of these to someone. So again, the analogy of a household is useful. If someone comes to your house and they're genuinely needy, you should endeavor to help them. That does not mean that you put your own family on the street in order to do so. Neither does it mean that someone that comes and is attacking your house, that this is the right verse to use, right? All of them kind of break down when you go, okay, is this what this is referring to? No, it's not. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then I was looking through the article that I wrote a few years ago, and I brought up actually a very popular book in Big Eva circles. It's called When Helping Hurts, and it's have you read that one? No, I think I've listened to a podcast. Maybe I have. But I've definitely listened to something on it a few years ago. It's about aid, isn't it? It's about international aid. Yeah. Is that? Yeah. Well, at the time, the book, I thought there was some really good stuff in it. I read it sort of as a post short-term missionary and just trying to understand, because I saw a lot of things that kind of bothered me when I was on the mission field about just these teams from the United States coming in and doing stuff that the local people were able to do, but they would come in and sort of, they didn't speak the language. So there's, just smiling and playing soccer with kids and stuff, your normal short-term mission stuff. And then they'd smile and go home. And then they would leave and they would we'd drill a well, but then when they would leave, the well would just fall into disrepair because nobody would keep it up because nobody knew how to. So it just got into this continuous thing where, you come in, you fix everything, you run a VBS program, you leave, and then everything just goes back to the way it was. So I read that book to kind of get some perspective on, well, how should you do this biblically correctly? And there's some really good points in the book. I don't agree with all of it, but basically the main crux of it is
you extend aid to somebody when they're at their most needy point. So as soon as they get to a point where they're able to, and it's not talking about benevolence or gifts. It's talking about like aid. So when do you go out of your way to bring aid to somebody? You do it like after an earthquake, after a natural disaster, during a war, like that. That is when aid is most needed and valuable, and when you should give it. If you're just going into a situation where people either are not willing to take responsibility themselves or don't know how to, then you're not actually helping. You're actually you probably are hurting. So it's there's some nuances, I guess, with it, but a lot of it had to do with applying these particular verses in the biblical way, which I just think is ironic. That so when they're like even like Big Eva, it's very popular. So when it's applying to short-term missions, it's one thing, but then when we take it up to our government level and it's like we're talking about policy, all of a sudden that all goes out the window, and it's just like, well, right. Redistribution to people who aren't in the nation. So anyways, I think we could probably leave it there, because I think we'd just be doing something somewhat repetitious. Sure. But thanks for coming on and giving your perspectives and trying to get a biblical view of this. I think this whole thing is probably gonna, we'll have to rediscuss this as time goes on, because the situation is so fluid and it's changing so quickly that applying these biblical principles to our respective nations and locales is gonna change. It's gonna shift. It's gonna be different. Yeah. But the Bible still applies. And the overall goal of preaching the gospel and discipling people according to the teachings of the Bible remains exactly the same. That doesn't change. No matter what's going on. So, any final thoughts?
Nothing. But actually, one is we need a book on this. Someone needs to write a book on this topic. Yeah. And if anybody is out there, I definitely don't have time, probably the skill. But if there's someone out there that has a heart to write a book on this, I think it'll be a blessing to the church to have a really good resource put together on this that tackles this debate thoughtfully. And from the perspective that we've talked about, where it's not just pro open borders, because those are the books that are out there. So that would be if anybody watching is thinking of doing so, I would absolutely buy it. So I'm sure other people would too.
Oh man, I'm thinking now. Okay, all right. We gotta figure this one out. TruthScript Press.
Nice.
Yeah, so it has a ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, just search for my name. I've got a YouTube channel under my name, Jamie Bambrick, and the same on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. So that's where I post my stuff. And very welcome to check out the channel.
And you can find some of his works at TruthScript.com. Again, TruthScript is a 501c organization. If you would like to donate, you can go to our page. If you would like to write, you can also do that. And we will see you next time. God bless everybody.